Hi everybody, I'm Joyce Raimondo. I'm the Education Coordinator at the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center in Springs, East Hampton. We're located about 100 miles east of New York City.
So what are we going to talk about today, and what's going on? It's certainly snowed.
Well, welcome to Winter Wonderland at Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center. And as you can see, the light is incredible. The light is reflecting off of the ocean, the bay, and also all of this amazing snow. And what attracted so many artists here as soon as the Long Island Railroad could bring artists to the east end of Long Island was the light itself, and of course its convenient close proximity to New York City. Pollock and Lee moved here in 1945. They bought all this property, an acre and a half of property, for only $5,000 with a loan down payment from Peggy Guggenheim, the art patron. Now, who negotiated that great deal? It was Lee Krasner. And we're going to look at the barn studio and a little bit of the property, and I'll tell you a little bit about what makes Pollock and Lee so special. But we are celebrating Pollock's birthday, which was January 28, 1912, so we'll focus a little bit today on Jackson Pollock.
All right.
Now, first off, when we look over here, you see this magnificent view, which is filled with snow, and if you go way back, you would see that there's actually a water view there of Accabonac Creek, which of course you can't see, it's covered with snow right now. Mm-hmm. On that, there's a little edge with a concrete platform now covered with snow, and that is where the now famous barn studio was originally situated. Mm-hmm. Of course, Pollock and Lee didn't want to block the beautiful view, so they moved it over here, and let's take a look at what's so special in this barn.
What about the other buildings on the site?
Mm-hmm. Now, when you come to visit the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center, you can enter the house where they lived. They moved here in 1945. They bought the property in 1946. It's all restored to when Lee lived here. She was the last person living here. Pollock died in 1956 in a drunk driving accident. He was behind the wheel of a car. I'll go into detail about that later. But let's take a look at where these two geniuses created their art. Okay, so let's take a look at the barn studio. Okay. Now, when you come in here, a lot of people are surprised that you can actually walk right on the floor where Pollock painted his very, very famous drip paintings. But in order to do that, we are going to put these little booties on to protect the floor, okay? Now, in this first room, this was mainly used for storage and supplies, canvases, things like that. But I want to first show you the barn studio and go over what made Pollock so special in terms of his creative technique. So here we are in the historic barn, and the main attraction here, of course, is the floor. It's filled with Pollock's drips and splatters from when he placed the canvas on the floor and worked from all four sides. This is not a work of art, but it is a national treasure, and it shows us Pollock's process. It also puts his painting in the context of the area and the landscape that surrounded him. But let's unpack what was Pollock's technique. Come on over. Now, Pollock, working in the barn studio, created abstract expressionist art. This is art that's very physical. You could say it's a release of energy. Pollock said it's energy made visible. But uniquely, Pollock developed a technique dripping paint from sticks, not even touching the canvas. This is groundbreaking, breaking with all rules of tradition. So take a look at some of the paints that he used. As you can see, this is not art paint, this is house paint. We see basters. He would squirt the paint from the basters. He would use the paint stirrer as a stick to drip the paint, and sometimes drip the paint from the paintbrush itself. He didn't develop this overnight. He studied with Siqueiros, the Mexican muralist who taught Pollock how to use unusual materials, even industrial materials, okay? Now, let's take a look at this wonderful photo here by Hans Namath. Hans Namath famously photographed and filmed Pollock. It shows Pollock dripping the paint down. Why did Pollock place the canvas on the floor? Not on an easel, not on a wall. This is very unusual. Pollock said in his words, he saw the Indian sand painters of the West. He saw them at the Museum of Modern Art. This was one of his influences. These sand painters were dribbling sand down onto the floor to create their image. They were working from all four sides. Pollock also worked from all four sides. He said he wanted to be in the painting. Sometimes he stepped in the painting. And it's also practical. Where the paint drips, it stays, it lands, and it just stays there, okay? Now, what is this all about? It's called action painting. What is action painting? Action painting is when you're moving your entire body, right? You're in action. Now, all artists, mostly, in some way, are moving. But Pollock and the other action painters, like Lee and other artists in the area, the movement is evident in the final product. When we look at Pollock's strip paintings, we can actually see where he was moving, okay? Now, Pollock said, I want to express my feelings rather than illustrate them. What does this mean? An illustration tells a story. Pollock is not telling a story, it's direct expression with color, line, shape, movement, texture. It's very, very physical, okay? It might appear that all these drips and spills and splatters, that it's so spontaneous, anyone could do it. But Pollock actually worked very methodically. He studied the great masters and all the modern artists who came before him. And he created beautiful rhythmic patterns in his work. It was not just random, okay? Now, one of his influences was jazz, but when he was in this barn studio, it was quiet. Jazz is about improvisation. Pollock, you can imagine him in here, moving, slowly dripping paint, one line leading to the next. He let the painting lead. Now, here's a question. Pollock died in 1956. Lee worked in the studio after his death. So why is this only Pollock's floor? Where are Lee's marks on the floor? Well, come over here, I'll show you the mystery behind the question. While Pollock and Lee were both alive, they covered this floor with boards. They winterized and renovated the studio. That's how it remained for many years. When this became a museum under the auspices of Stony Brook University, and Lee had already passed away, the conservators came in here, as you can see, and they tore off the boards, they tore off the paper, and underneath was Pollock's floor, perfectly preserved. Now, Lee worked in here, and you can see evidence of her work as well, but she didn't paint on the floor, she painted on the wall. And here we call these ghost marks. You can see exactly where she made her paintings. And if you know her paintings, like over here, right here, look over here. See that? You see green. You can trace, aha, this is where Lee made her famous painting, Portrait in Green. And it's fun to match up the artworks with the, where they were painted. Now, also fun, believe it or not, you can actually find Pollock's footprints on this floor. So if you look in this area right here, you'll see this one is very, very well formed right here. And there are footprints in other locations as well.
Wow, barefoot.
It makes really the artist you could say comes alive in the sense that he's an icon, of course, but here we see he was a living human being, okay? Now, a little bit about the story of Pollock. How is a person who was born in Cody, Wyoming, to very humble beginnings? He had 4 brothers. The father had a hard time keeping a job. They moved from place to place. There's a picture of Pollock when he was in a school-age boy, And you could see the children in the schoolhouse, in front of the schoolhouse, their clothes are torn and tattered. How does someone with humble beginnings rise to fame and become the center, really a center of the art world? So a little bit about the story. Pollock actually moved to New York City. He followed his brother Charles, who was also an artist. And there he went to the Art Students League. He was studying with Thomas Hart Benton. He also, in time, visited all the Museum of Modern Art, learning about Picasso, learning about Surrealists, right? Filling his mind with all of the wonderful creative artists of his time. And he said Thomas Hart Benton was a difficult personality to react against. Benton was teaching Pollock more traditional art, mural making, things like that. Pollock eventually goes within. How do you paint the world within? The world of emotion, of dreams, and even your subconscious, right? Eventually, Pollock paints things you can't see, his inner life, and eventually this leads to abstract art. He meets Lee Krasner. Originally, they met at a dance, but Lee didn't typically tell that as the first meeting. She didn't really recall him from the dance that much. They were in an exhibit together at Macmillan Gallery, and Lee was curious. She had never heard of Jackson Pollock. She went to his studio/apartment unannounced, and the rest was literally history. The couple hit it off. They had so much in common artistically and shared many, many interests and also many friends. They moved out here from New York City, as I said, in 1945, and bought all this property for $5,000, okay? They didn't have children. They had 2 dogs, and here's one of the dogs pictured here. The dogs' names were Gypsy and Ahab. And Pollock had an unusual pet, and here is his pet crow called Caw. And there's a couple of very, very famous photos of Pollock with his crow. Very unusual.
It is.
Now, there's the myth of the starving artist, right? But Pollock became very successful in his own lifetime, thanks to Lee Krasner, who managed his career. She did the negotiating. How was he able to paint in here without working at a job? Lee negotiated with Peggy Guggenheim, the art patron, to get Pollock a monthly stipend so he could just paint and he wouldn't have to worry about other forms of income. In return, Peggy Guggenheim had access to Pollock's creations and could represent him through her Art of the Century in New York City. During this time, Lee put her own career on the back burner. She didn't promote herself as an artist, she focused on Pollock, but she always painted. Now, here's a very famous article in Life magazine. It says, "Is he the greatest living painter in the United States?" When Pollock rose to fame, all of the other abstract expressionist artists like de Kooning, they all rose to fame too, but you could say Pollock was the front runner, okay? This was a game changer, this article. Now, there is a sad, tragic part to Pollock's life. Pollock was an alcoholic. He didn't drink in his studio to have fun. It was a disease, and he knew he had a problem, and he sought treatment early on. He was medicated, he was hospitalized, and he was under the care of a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist actually encouraged Pollock to bring in drawings to discuss, to go within and unlock the troubles that were within him. This was also an influence on Pollock, this idea of Jungian psychology. Pollock was sober for 2 years when he made his great drip paintings, but unfortunately he succumbed to alcoholism. He did relapse, and following his relapse, he became very, very depressed. He started an affair with a younger woman, Ruth Kligman, and his marriage was, of course, very tense. And Lee went to Paris. She had already planned this trip, and while she was away in 1956, Pollock invited his mistress out, who invited her friend Edith Metzger. Unfortunately, this fun summer outing turned into a nightmare. Pollock invited these young women to go into the car to go to a party at Alfonso Sorio's. And I won't go into the details of the crash, but basically right down the street Pollock crashed the car, and the only survivor was his mistress, Ruth Kligman. Pollock was 44 years old. But we're here to celebrate Pollock today, to celebrate his genius and to celebrate his creativity and the contribution that he gave to the arts by opening doors of expression for artists for years to come. So I hope that you visit the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center, pkhouse.org. You do need to book a tour in advance. We're open in May and continue through the fall. And I do also hope you go to see the original Pollock drip paintings, the iconic paintings, whether it be at the Museum of Modern Art, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, or many, many other locations throughout the world. Thank you.
All right, thank you.